topic of my talk is the historical ties among the people of the book. And this is part one. Tomorrow I deliver part two in Birmingham, inshallah. So eventually you'll want to get the tape of both parts if you're interested in this part. So for this part, I want to look at Abraham as one of the historical ties between the three faiths, and hence I've entitled it the Abrahamic faith. So I begin as always by praising Allah Azza wa Jal, and I ask Him to send peace and blessings upon all of His prophets and messengers, especially the last of all of them, after whose name we say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. So, the Abrahamic faith, we can describe these as three of the world's major religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So what are the connections between these three faiths, and how is that connection center on the person of Ibrahim alayhi salam, or Abraham as he's called in the English language? Now, our world has been reduced to a global village, and in order for us to function as contributing citizens to this global village, it is important that we understand not only our own religion, but also the religions of other citizens. The religions which are most closely related to Islam are Judaism and Christianity, and hence we're making advances tonight in understanding these three faiths. In the study of the world's religions, we look at the various regions of the world in which the various religions have emerged. And in a broad classification, academic scholars will speak of Eastern religions and Western religions. So if we think of the world as being here, the East on this side, then we have, not being concerned with the New World for the moment, we think of the age in which the religions have actually emerged in history. We're thinking of a sort of line between here, with the Eastern religions being the religions from Asia and that region. So we're talking about religions of India, China, and Japan. And when we think of Western religions, we're thinking of religions that emerged out of this region here, the religions of the Near and Middle East. So I didn't invent this classification. Academic scholars studying the history of the world's religions use this broad classification. But that classification means that they lump together the three religions that we want to talk about: Judaism, Christianity, and Judaism being the religion of Israel, Christianity that emerged with the teachings of Jesus, of whom be peace, and then the teachings of St. Paul after him. And Jesus, as we know, was from Palestine. And finally, this is taking a bit longer than I expected, religion about Jesus. Finally, the religion of Islam that emerged in its present form with the preachings of our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who was born in Arabia some 1400 years ago. Now, if we think of this land that we're looking at, then we can first think of Judaism and Christianity being established in the land of Palestine, what is now referred to as Israel, this little patch of land here. Jesus is said to have been from somewhere in Nazareth. And here is Nazareth on the map. I know it's too far away for you to see, but you get a general idea of where things are located. You have Egypt on one side, Jordan on the other, Syria on north, Lebanon, and there the Mediterranean Sea, and there is the land of Israel, where Judaism came to be established, and then eventually Jesus, on whom be peace, emerges teaching the gospel, or the gospel. The symbol of Jerusalem today is this Dome of the Rock mosque. It is, of course, beautiful to look at, but it symbolizes, in a way, the central point from which these religions emanate, and the central point to which these religions tend to look back at. The Dome of the Rock mosque, in all its beauty and splendor, gives us a single point of focus as we will approach Jerusalem, and this is also the point of contention between the three major religions. To understand how things have unfolded and to see the historical ties between these three great religions, we need to go back to the book of Genesis in the Bible. The Bible, as you know, is a collection of a number of many smaller writings, each one called a book, some 66 books in the Protestant Bible and 73 in the Catholic Bible. The first of these books is referred to as the book of Genesis. Here I have a diagram called from Nelson's book of Bible maps and charts that gives you some idea of the timeline that we're dealing with. The events that are narrated in the book of Genesis covers this sort of timeline. We have, starting with the creation of Adam, they say some 4,000 BC. That date obviously cannot be correct, because it would mean that the world is only 6,000 years old. Today we know the world to be some billions of years old. But the Bible gives the dates from Adam all the way down. Adam lived for so many years, then he had a son, Seth, and then Seth lived for so many years, and then he had a son, and then the son lived for so many years, and then he begat his son, and so on. So if you add up all of the ages of these individuals over time, this is approximately what you get. About 4,000 BC for the creation of Adam alayhi salam. But when we get past Ibrahim alayhi salam to the later prophets like Dawood alayhi salam, eventually we are dealing with a more firm dating. In terms of Ibrahim alayhi salam, who's given here as being somewhere around 2000 BC, the dating is not approximate, and historians even doubt if there was really such a person known as Abraham. And it's a matter of faith for Muslims that he did exist, and based on the Quranic narrative, that being accepted as a revelation from Allah Azza wa Jal, we have no doubt that Ibrahim alayhi salam existed. But if one were to just simply ask about this from a strictly historical point of view, one would be short of evidence for his existence. But you can see that we're dealing with a long time ago. 2000 BC would be about some 4,000 years ago we're looking at here. So Abraham is said to be the father of monotheism. It is with his direction that he had chosen in life that we have the three great religions emerging: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. After Abraham, we have one of his great-grandsons, Joseph, who is known to Muslims as Yusuf alayhi salam. And further up down, we have Musa alayhi salam, whose timeline is given here as 1500 BC. But generally, scholars place Musa alayhi salam around 1200 BC. And Dawood alayhi salam is said to have lived around 1000 BC. All of these are prophets and messengers of God accepted by Muslims as well. These are heroic figures, some of them prophets who are mentioned in the Bible and accepted by Jews and by Christians. So far it seems that we're speaking the same language. We're speaking about the same people, about the same heroes, about the same prophets, about the same great teachers from God. Eventually things will start to get different, and we'll look at where the differences are. Let me go down a little bit. In the Bible, in the book of Genesis, it is said that God made a covenant, an agreement with Abraham, and promised him a certain piece of land, not a small piece, as we will see. Abraham is said to have come from this place, Ur, near the foot of the river Euphrates, and God told him to leave that place and go up to Haran, where God will show him the land which he's going to give him. Now Abraham might have thought that by going to Haran he will find the land, but then God gives him another instruction, telling him to go down into the land of Canaan. So he goes down into the land of Canaan, and this is the land that God is promising him. But not only the land of Canaan, God promises him, according to the book of Genesis in chapter 15, the land from the banks of the river Nile all the way to the Euphrates River. So I don't know if the brothers can see the map here from where I'm standing, So you're looking from here all the way here, which means that you would include a part of Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula, a northern part of Arabia. You would include a part of Iraq, a part of Syria, and all of Lebanon. A large piece of land that the Bible says God gave to Abraham as an inheritance to pass on to his generations forever. But not all of his generations, only through the ones who come through the descent of Isaac. So things are being seen from a singular direction. Obviously, this is written by the descendants of Isaac, and they write with that perspective in mind. The history is written by the winners, and the winners here claim all of the land. That was of importance at the time. Where did Musa alayhi salam travel? Musa alayhi salam, we are told, traveled out from Egypt, rescuing the people of Israel from under the domination of the Pharaoh. And the exact path he took is not agreed upon. Different ideas are mentioned, but in one path is what is traced here, where the people leave Egypt and they go down into the Sinai Peninsula. They lose themselves for about 40 years. Then eventually they go up from the west side of the Jordan River, and they will eventually have to cross the Jordan River and go in and take over Jerusalem and the areas around there. What was to be done with the people who already occupied this land? Now it is called the land of Canaan. Why is it called the land of Canaan and not the land of Abraham? Well, it's called the land of Canaan because the Canaanites lived there before Abraham was promised the land. Not only the Canaanites, but 10 people are given by name in the Bible: the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, and so on. So what was to be done with those people? Well, the book of Genesis doesn't say, but we know from elsewhere in the Bible, in the book of Deuteronomy, for example, that these people were to be annihilated, which many will find to be strange, but that is precisely what is given in the Bible. You would think that if God is going to give a land to somebody, God will have some repatriation program in mind for the people who already live there. But this was not the case. The Bible says that they were to be exterminated. And so when the Israelites come up from this side of the Jordan River and they're going to enter into that land, they would go in and exterminate the people. Musa alayhi salam was not allowed to enter the land, so he died before they could enter. But Joshua, his successor, does enter the land, and he carries on the program. This idea about entering the land, taking it over, actually is very central to the first 5 books of the Bible, which are now referred to as the Torah, and said to be given to Musa alayhi salam. While Muslims accept that Musa alayhi salam had a Torah from Allah, Muslims, of course, do not accept the current version of the Torah as the original. So we don't say that God said the things which are mentioned in the Torah, especially if it involves the extermination of whole groups of people. So how did Musa alayhi salam get to bring the people from out of Egypt if God had told Abraham, as we saw in a previous map? Let me go back to that one. If God told Abraham to come down into the land of Canaan, how did his descendants get to come from Egypt? Well, the Bible relates that after Ibrahim alayhi salam and in the time of Yusuf alayhi salam, there was a drought, a famine in the land of Canaan, where the Israelites dwelt. And so they had to go over to Egypt where they would find food. Joseph's brothers initially went and got food from the land where Joseph was, that was in Egypt, and eventually his father went there as well, and that is how the Israelites came to multiply and dwell in Egypt. At first they were received well, but over time, subsequent pharaohs in Egypt did not remember who Joseph was, and and the importance that he had in Egypt, and that Pharaoh began to oppress the children of Israel. And it is then that Musa alayhi salam was commissioned to bring the people out of Egypt from under the domination of the Pharaoh. If I to proceed then, here is an illustration of an artist's rendition of what things might have looked like when Musa alayhi salam was made to cross the Red Sea miraculously, whereas in fact the body of the Pharaoh and his contemporaries, his army were drowned. But the Quran mentions something interesting. The Quran tells us that when the Pharaoh was drowned, God said to him, this day we save you in terms of your body, that you may be a sign for those who come later. Now when we read the previous narratives, we get the idea that the Pharaoh just simply perished there and was drowned in the sea. And that was the end of him. But indeed, the body of the Pharaoh was discovered at Thebes in the King's Valley in 1898, was first documented in a book by Sir Elliot Smith entitled The Royal Mummies. And Dr. Maurice Bouquet, in his book The Bible, the Quran and Science, tells us of his own encounter with this body. He had the opportunity to examine this body at the Egyptian Museum until eventually it was moved to Paris. And he found that this person must have died either due to shock or due to drowning. And if by shock, then shock just prior to the drowning. The way in which the body of the Pharaoh was preserved then, and is mentioned in the Quran, whereas in fact it is not mentioned in the previous scriptures. We get the idea from those previous scriptures that the body of the Pharaoh, that Pharaoh just simply perished here in the sea. That was the end of it. This illustrates that in order to understand the Quran, we have to understand something about the previous religion. So when I introduced this talk, I said we need to know something about the other religions in order to be contributing citizens to our world that has been reduced to a global village. We need to understand other religions, especially those which are close to ours. But now we can see another reason why Muslims need to understand the other scriptures and the other religions, because there is so much in common, and the religion should be understood in the light of each other. And the more we understand of each religion, the more we understand not only the totality, but the totality itself contributes to greater understanding of each individual religion, such as our own. We understand Islam better by comparison and contrast, but also by the information which is available from the study of the other religions. So you see that there are historical ties. The historical ties between Islam and Christianity come to be blended and blurred because the doctrines of Christianity, at least the central doctrines of Christianity, seem to steer so far away from the religion of Islam. Doctrines such as the Trinity, the divinity of Jesus, and the idea of the vicarious atonement, that Jesus died a sacrificial death to bring us closer to God. Where do these ideas come from, and how have they developed over time? I'd like you to remember one thing regarding that, and that is the way in which the Gospels came to be written, and the ideas about Jesus developed over time, and to be seen as developing even within the Gospels or among the Gospels themselves. Let's look at what we have in the Bible. I said that the Bible comprises a number of books, right? Remember how many books there were? How many? 66, right? You knew that before I mentioned it today, otherwise you wouldn't have remembered, okay? There's 66. And that's in the Protestant version. And in the Catholic version, how many books? 73. Now, we can divide the Bible into two major sections. Not that we can divide it, but it is already marked in two separate sections. One is called the Old Testament, and the other is called what? The New Testament. So how many books are in the New Testament? How many books are in the New Testament? Huh? 20? How many? Somebody said 20 and somebody said 7. Can you put the two together? 27. Okay. These brothers are cooperating with each other. That's nice. 27 books that make up the New Testament. Some of them are very tiny books. Some of them are just letters that somebody wrote to someone else. That has later on been collected and called one of the books of the New Testament. Now, of the 27, and some are called Gospels. How many Gospels are there? 4. And here we have them by name, named according to the putative author. Matthew, which I've written here for short, Matt. So that's short for Matthew. That's not Matt Damon. Okay? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are the names that have been ascribed to these Gospels, because sometime in Christian history, when people were wondering who wrote these books, some early Christian scholars said, oh, that one must be written by Matthew. So call that one Matthew, and that one Mark, and so on. Otherwise, today, it is widely recognized that these books are largely written by anonymous authors, by authors whose names we do not really know today. To say that Luke wrote this one that's called Luke, this is a little bit firmer. To say that John wrote this one requires some clarification, because scholars believe that this went through many stages of editing, and the final version cannot be said to have come from a man whose name was John, who was a disciple of Isa alayhi salam. Matthew's Gospel was definitely not written by Matthew, and there are reasons for that, and I will answer that in the Q&A if you need to know the reason for that. You will want to know the reason, but we have limited time, so I'll skip ahead. Mark was a very common name at the time, so to say that this one was written by Mark doesn't really help us much, because we don't really know who is this Mark. Most of us have 2 names. Steve Johnson, let's say, is Steve, son of John Johnson. So he has 2 names. He has a personal name, and he has a family name. And so people are named. Muhammad ibn Abdullah, Muhammad, son of Abdullah. So we identify a person not only by a calling name, but also by the name of his father. In biblical times, this was very common. So we have in the Bible, for example, a certain man is called Bartimaeus. He is the son of Timaeus. So that's how we recognize people, not only by their first names. So if you call a person Mark, whose son was he? Which Mark do we mean? We don't really know. So that shows you the way in which these Gospels have been accepted over time, and the fact that they are of anonymous authorship. Now, if one were to open the New Testament today, one will find the Gospels in this order: Matthew, then Mark, and then Luke, and then John. I'm going to step aside so the brothers can see that as well. See that, brothers? All right. Now, that's the order as they appear in the Bibles today. But scholars now believe that the order between Matthew and Mark in particular needs to be reversed. Because they think that Mark was actually written before Matthew, and that Matthew used Mark as its source, as one of its sources. So we should have it like this: Mark, then Matthew, and Luke and John. The important thing that you should remember in all of this is that Mark came first and John came last. If you can remember just that one point, it'll help you in understanding much of what goes on in discussions between Muslims and Christians. Let me just illustrate for you typically what happens. Typically, a Muslim is trying to prove to a Christian that Isa alayhi salam was a human being. So you would very easily find proofs for that from the Gospel according to Mark. And typically the Christian is trying to prove to you that Isa alayhi salam is God. And his proof for that will typically come from the Gospel according to John. For example, if one of your Christian friends tells you that Jesus said, whoever has seen me has seen the Father, where do you think that comes from? John. If somebody says that Jesus said, I and the Father are one, where do you think that comes from? John. And so on. A favorite passage of the Bible. If you open a Bible which has been placed in a hotel room, for example, before you get to the Bible itself, the first few introductory pages may have a verse of the Bible translated into a wide variety of languages, into Arabic and Urdu and Turkish and so on. That verse is from John chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. You heard that verse before? So where does it come from? John. Okay? So you can see that the favorite verses typically come from the Gospel according to John. So that's why we need to remember that Mark was first and John is last. When we remember that, we can see that the proofs that Isa alayhi salam was very much a human being and a prophet of God comes from Mark, and the proofs that he is divine somehow comes from the Gospel according to John. And there's been a development over time. Jesus has been changed from a man to a divine being. I'm not saying God, because John's Gospel doesn't portray Jesus as God, but you would certainly get the impression, if you were a Christian, that John is presenting Jesus as God, because the developed faith among Christians is that Jesus is God. And when they read the Gospel according to John, they're seeing, yeah, what we believe is exactly there, because look, Jesus said all of these things. I and the Father are one, whoever has seen me has seen the Father, and for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and so on. So we need to remember that Mark is first and John is last. You think you can remember that? That's all you have to remember. And then that will help you in a wide variety of discussions. So to remember anything, you use a mnemonic device. Think of associate what you want to learn with something that you already know.